A very, very good evening. A warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick and Pay. And welcome, slightly bittersweet this, welcome to the end of our Women in Wine Month. Now, it certainly doesn't mean that we are no longer having women on the show until this time next year. In fact, such has been the success of the last month, I'm not sure we'll have many men on the show going forward, but it is the official end of what has been a really, really special month, focusing on just the women in our wine industry. We've only had women on the show for this particular month, and gee, has it been a terrific month, from winemakers to women in the industry to women in wine media. It's been a terrific celebration of the industry and a very good look at what I strongly suspect is the actual heartbeat of our South African wine industry. Great collection of wine, great collection of guests, and some fabulous conversation and discussion over the course of the last month. And when I decided that this is something that we really wanted to do, one of the questions was, well, how do we wrap this up? Because if it does go really well, we need to end on a high note. I can tell you, I'm not sure it's possible to end on a higher note than the one we do today. The collection of guests that we have is outstanding, for pioneers in the wine industry who I'm enormously excited to have on this show. Very quickly though, before we get into that, a big thank you to Leon and Margot down at the Fledge. Spent the weekend in Carlottsdorp. It was freezing, properly Arctic, but it's a beautiful stretch of the world. We filmed the final episode of our Adventures in Chenin series, which went really well. It was a great deal of fun. Some terrific food, Chenin Blanc and ostrich fillet, highly recommended as a combination. So big thank you to the team down in Carlottsdorp and the Rietfontein Ostrich Palace, to Corbus and Eloise. Thank you for looking after us over the weekend. A little earlier on today, a big thank you to the Saxon Hotel. We did a whole pile of filming with a bunch of people. We had Thornton from Bruce Jack, Bruce's assistant winemaker, also looks after the wine at the Drift. We had Richard from De Grendel joining us, Lars, the owner of Baton Verwachting, and we also caught up with Johan de Vet from De Wetshof, who's been a regular guest on the show over the years, and celebrating some of their new vintages and what they're up to on their respective estates. Look out for all of that coming up in the next month or two, in what's going to be a really busy run home to Christmas. It's almost September, it's almost spring, it's still snowing, crazy times, a crazy year, but this sanity prevails by drinking good South African wine, and that is exactly what we do today. And three of our guests come to us from South Africa. All four of them are South Africans or thereabouts, but one of them comes from somewhere exotic. So in no particular order, to welcome in our very, very final episode for this month. Hello to Vivian Kleynhans from Seven Sisters, to Angela Lloyd, who's a great supporter of the show. Dan. Favorite wine writers, the terribly frightening Dr. Winnie Bowman, and then Norma Ratcliffe, who's got up at some ungodly hour in Canada, poured some wine in her igloo, and is prepared to celebrate with us. Guys, welcome to all of you. It's an utter delight to have you with us on the show.
Thank you.
And thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan.
And Norma, in particular, thank you for waking up particularly early over in Canada. Why do we find you in Canada? And am I right, Norma? We know that you're this world-famous winemaker who broke all sorts of ground and was incredibly innovative. Am I right in saying, though, that you also skied professionally for Canada?
Well, not professionally, but at quite a high level, and skied lots of events, downhill, slalom, cross-country, yeah. But not professionally. Not professionally.
Oh,
but that was one of my other loves.
An acclaimed skier nonetheless, but also an acclaimed winemaker. Explain to us the Canada connection and then how that leads into Norma, the South African wine pioneer.
Well, in fact, it's quite a nostalgic day for me tomorrow, because tomorrow it'll be 50 years since I arrived in South Africa. When I tell some of the young winemakers it's 50 years, they just about faint. I mean, nobody could be that old. And Angela came just a little bit before I did. And I knew a bit about drinking wine, but not fine wine. And I came to Stellenbosch, where I went to Warwick Wine Estate. I'd met Stan Ratcliffe in Europe. And that's how it all started. And he was a wine grower. So I was a wine grower. We went from wine grower to winemaker. And during the 70s, I studied the way we studied in those days, no internet. We bought the books. We had them shipped from France and we had them shipped from America and all that sort of stuff. And I did the courses at the Cape Wine Academy. And then I said, one day we are going to make wine on this farm, encouraged by all my neighbors, like Frans Verlan, Jan Boland was then a neighbor, Spot Sterling. He said, you should be with that farm, you should be making your own wine. And I said, well, one reason we're not making our own wine is that we actually have a big bond on this farm. We're going to pay that back, and then we're going to start, which we did in 1984.
And you then moved into a space that was so innovative, Norma. You became the first member of the Women's Winemakers Guild. I think you were the only woman making wine in South Africa for about 8 years. How did you settle on the making of the wine, and how difficult was it? You mentioned some friends you had on nearby estates, but was it a difficult space to move into at that time as a woman looking to make wine in South Africa?
Well, I've said this before. No, it wasn't. And everyone in our valley, they wanted me to make great wine. So anytime I needed advice, they were there with advice. Kevin Arnold was also a great, he's younger than me. He was a great mentor to me. And Janie Muller was making wine at the same time. And there were a few people making wine, but not somebody starting with a new estate wine. And so I did lots of experimental wine during the 70s, did some trips to France, and said, there's something missing here in what they're doing. And that is one, new oak barrels. And the other is, I think Cabernet Franc is going to be a great variety for us, which we only planted in about 1980.
Were you the first? Were you the first? You were the first person to plant Cabernet Franc in South Africa?
No, I wasn't. No. But I was. I bottled that in 1988. It was kind of my baby, and I said it was that funny old clone that we got from Distill that we got from northern Italy. I think Giorgio Dell'Accio had something to do with that. And then I made it for about 4 or 5 years, and then I said, but this is fabulous. We called that vineyard the Far Side, the Gary Larson Far Side. And it just seemed to produce such high quality Cabernet Franc. And I think that clone is a little bit unfashionable now because it got leaf roll virus. People are planting different clones, but it really worked for us on our soil, and that was it was a component of our blend. And we started making Cabernet. The blend was where I was going with the wine, to make a Bordeaux style blend in South Africa, and that's what we did.
We're going to taste some of that Cabernet Franc just a little later, and I want to ask you a little bit about your time with the Cape Winemakers Guild as well. Angela, you've been writing about wine for a long time now, and doing so with great acclaim and great celebration. I know that Norma will never do this herself, so I'll ask you to do it instead. Give us a sense, if you will, of just how much of an impact Norma Ratcliffe has had, continues to have, on the South African wine industry.
Well, I remember going to the launch of her very first wine that was commercial. That was 85. And it was a hugely exciting event because here you were on one of the best farms in the Stellenbosch region. And Norma had really taken the industry by storm already with her first wine. And the grapes from the farm had being delivered to one of the merchants prior to that. So people knew what quality was there. But, you know, Norma actually getting up and making that wine was incredible because it was a difficult vintage too, 85. and she made such a success of it. And I think it didn't take any further vintages for her to become really have the stature that she has today.
Time and again, when I speak to young women as winemakers in South Africa, Norma's name comes up over and over and over again. It seems like, as much as I'm sure she'll play it down because that's the kind of person she is, it's a sustained impact that remains to this day, inspiring a young generation of female winemakers.
Yes, indeed. And she's very generous with her advice and help. I mean, even though she's retired now and Warwick isn't part of the family farm anymore, I think a lot of people still look to her for advice and support. And I mean, she's still I can't remember what the Cape Winemakers Guild call people who've actually retired now, but not retired. I mean, she's very important to the guild still.
And rightly so. Just as she is important to the guild, so you're a very important part of our wine industry. What about your wine journey, Angela? When did you first fall in love with wine? What was your path into this particular world?
Dan, this is going to be a very potted history of the last 51 years. I came here in 1970 to visit my brother, and I met my husband just a few weeks after I got here. He was already a member of the Wine Tasters Guild, so I went off to tastings with him and found I had a bit of aptitude for tasting, and I was never short of an opinion. So I got a reputation, and eventually I was nominated to become a member of the guild and voted in as the very first lady member, which of course had quite a few of the more conservative men grumbling into their beards. And then I got onto the committee and started organizing tastings, which of course got me to know a lot of the wine people. And it was very useful because when I entered the wine industry professionally in 1983, I had been invited to run the Cape Wine Centre, which was the promotional arm of a local liquor retailer. And I went there and I had the most fantastic 2 years. I was given carte blanche to organize tastings, events, dinners, whatever. And one of the things that I did there too was to write a monthly newsletter, which was read by various editors. That got me into writing. And then I met John and Erica Platter through those 2 years. And when I decided to take the giant leap into freelancing at the end of 85, they asked me to come on board. And things just snowballed. I mean, writing, I've done the South African section for various international publications. I've written for Decanter, for Wine Enthusiast. I actually did the first broadcast on wine in the early 1990s. And then Michael Fridgen was very supportive over judging. I judged on the SAA Winers Awards when SAA actually had wings, and also the Trophy Wine Show for 11 years. Fantastic experience that, because I met and judged with some of the world's top wine people. But Dan, I think what I value most is travel and making wine. You know, knowledge you can get from reading a book or on the internet, but understanding comes from experience. And traveling, Mark and I, when he was still alive, we traveled to Australia, New Zealand, California, all across the European winelands. And there's nothing like standing in a vineyard or meeting the winemaker to really get an idea of what it's all about. And then I actually made wine. I made Semillon, which I love, for 4 or 5 vintages at Delheim. Spatz very kindly thought I would, perhaps do some good for the winery by getting that publicized. And I did have a few very good vintages, and dear Alan Mullins actually put them on his wine list for Rosenhof when he co-owned that. So it's been fantastic, and it's still wonderful. I mean, it's so inspiring, the young people, and every wine. I mean, platter has been totally overwhelming this year with the alcohol ban. We were a month without wines, but it's just so wonderful. You taste the wine and it just speaks to you and sings to you, and I just love it. I mean, it's hard work, but one doesn't retire from wine.
51 years since you touched down then. It's a long time tasting, drinking, enjoying, writing about, celebrating wine. You clearly haven't got bored of it yet. What is it about wine that keeps you excited, that keeps you getting up in the morning thinking, I can't wait to taste something new?
I think, my mum was a very good cook. So I've always loved cooking and the different tastes and textures and the smells and everything. And it's exactly the same with wine. There is so much to enjoy, and there's so much innovation that's going on today. People using skin contact, people aging white wines under floor like sherry, and there's never a boring moment with it, and the youngsters in particular are fantastic today. I mean, that I hope keeps me a bit younger, just really admiring them and enjoying what they're doing.
It's a terrific story you have, Angela. It's one that's being appreciated by people watching. Melissa Sutherland, quite amazing, Angela. I am 51, and your journey is inspiring. Daryl Balfour, I know is a good friend of both of ours, watching. Good evening, ladies. And Dan, morning, Norm. Real thorn amongst the roses tonight, Dan. I think a single rose and many thorns. Let's go that way. Greg Sherwood, who's watching in London. Greetings to Winnie Bowman and all the ladies from London on a bank holiday Monday. Greg, great to have you watching as always. And Grant Sauls, who's watching on YouTube at the moment. What a star lineup of ladies. So much history and life experience amongst these ladies. They're like global libraries of this world. Well, let's move on to another of our guests. She's got her own terrific story. Vivian, the Seven Sisters story is groundbreaking in so many ways in South Africa. For people who don't know it, give us a little snapshot of what Seven Sisters is and what inspired you to get on the road to this groundbreaking wine journey of yours.
Thank you, Dan. And I'm really honored to be on your show tonight, and even to be with esteemed winemaker Norma Ratcliffe and Angela and Winnie. So thank you very much. Yes, we are 7 biological sisters, and we grew up in a small fishing village called Paternoster. And while we grew up there, it was like a one-horse town. Nothing really happened there, but for the older folk to drink their white wine. Most of the time it was white wine. And I must be honest with you, at the time, I didn't like wine. When I started my journey in the wine industry about 15 years ago, so I'm a complete newcomer to the industry. I did not know wine. For me, I was, I normally would say that I did not find wine. Wine founded me. And I needed to become unshackled because I was in my business for about 2 years and I could not put my lips to a glass of wine. And that's really, yeah, I paid dearly for that because I lost my first business in the industry because I could not taste and I did not know about the wine. But then I geared up and I went to the Stellenbosch Business School in wine viticulture for about a year, and I did a few courses with the Cape Wine Academy, and the Seven Sisters brand was launched and wine was launched. So we thought, how are we going to get into this very well-established wine industry? And I mean, South Africa is saturated with good quality wines. And yeah, here we are newcomers. So we thought we would call and we would bottle a personality and character of each of the sisters. So that is how we started.
It's a story that is not just wonderful in terms of how it brought you together as a family, and the way that you speak to the sisters, I think is lovely. But also women of colour in South Africa running their own business in the wine world. It's not the status quo. It doesn't happen a huge amount. How much of a challenge was it? How exciting was it for you to break new ground, to do something that hadn't really been done before?
Well, you know what? Every day was like a challenge. It was like my daughter would tell me, "No, mother, you know this business. It's like every day It's like what? Yeah, it was like having to put out fires and having to overcome obstacles and challenges. And yeah, look, I had to start from the product. I did not have an own farm. It was very difficult. As a woman of color, obviously, it's a white male-dominated industry, and it's not heard of a colored woman getting into the wine industry. And yeah, I did not start with a farm with the grapes. I had to start with the product first. So I had to source my grapes, had to have my wines made at an established winery. And in 2009, we acquired a barren piece of land in Stellenbosch and planted some Chardonnay and Shiraz grapes. So in 2016, apart from the Seven Sisters range, we launched our Brutus Reserve range, which is our family name. Now, I'm not sure if you know, when we left Paternoster, I was 16 years old, and we were evicted as a family, and we had to move to the nearest town. Or that was the only and shortest way to find a place to live. And we had to split up too with family and relatives. We were 10 people, mom and dad, and 8 children. We have a baby brother. And so we were separated, and we all went our own ways, and it was not fun ways. But when we started our farm and developed it in Stellenbosch, it was a way of coming home. My mom and dad has passed on. They would have been so proud of us. I know that. We grew up very strict, very disciplined, very hardworking. I can, up till today, not sit still. I'm always busy, always trying to find better ways or ways to better our lives. And yes, so the farm in Stellenbosch was really a way for us as a family to get together. I remember in the year of 2016, when we opened the doors and we did food and wine pairings. It was such a lovely time. We came together, we cooked, we talked, we spoke about our childhood days, and we find ways to celebrate, because life was very difficult for us growing up. And I would always say, you know, when we're sad, we drink a glass of wine, and when we're happy, we celebrate. So I grew passionate about wine, and I really enjoy my glass of wine at night. I said to my husband, you know, I'm sure my glass of red wine has kept me from attracting this COVID virus, because it's keeping the blood thin. So yes, it's.
I think that's an excellent philosophy, and one I'm very glad it's such a lovely, lovely story, and I love the fact you've triumphed over so many different challenges, and it's great to be able to share this with you. On the subject of stories, Dr. Winnie Bowman, who I've spent many wine tastings and lunches and launches cheerfully jousting with. Very, very warm welcome onto Dan. Really like very, very warm welcome. Somebody who generally has cognac for breakfast and kicks off her day from there, and is a real titan of our South African wine industry. What about your wine journey, Winnie? You're such a part of the fabric of the South African wine world. Where did it all start for you? Where did it all start for you?
Oh, I've been unmuted. I think you kept it on your finger on the button for until the last second, Dan. Yeah, well, I've been drinking wine since I was about 6 years old, if you can believe that, and brandy. We used to have a little thimbleful of muscadel at our Sunday lunches. And of course, I grew up in Oudtshoorn, which is right next to Calitzdorp, where you were on the weekend. And of course, some of the best muscadels come from there. So we had quite a lovely spread. And my father used to drink brandy with Coke, and I was allowed to put my little pinky in just to taste it. And until, of course, my mother decided that sugar was no longer good for him, and he had to have it with soda water, after which I didn't really like it very much. But got back into it when I was doing my Cape Wine Master's studies, where brandy, of course, is a very big part of it. And I love brandy, as you know. And I've been inviting you for a long time to come and taste all the 70 open bottles in my house. So maybe that'll happen sooner rather than later.
Expect me to be there before long. I'm steeling myself for it. One thing to have the wine at lunch, to have it as part of the family, to actually make it your life, I'm fascinated by, because you're a qualified physiotherapist, you've been in education, you've got all manner of different interests. I think you're a scientist of sorts as well. Why wine, and what pushed you into where you find yourself today? Yeah,
well, it's very interesting, because my husband and I used to travel quite a lot, and as Angela says, that's the only way to really see what is going on with any wine and the vineyard, and that is where you really see the soul of wine. So whenever we travel overseas, we would always include somewhere where there's wine, some area where there's wine, visit the wineries, meet the winemakers, taste with them. And some wines just never taste the same away from the place where you first tasted it, which is such a lovely memory always when you're trying something different and something new. So we used to travel quite a lot, and then once I'd finished with all my studies, I had a baby, and I was at home. And one day we were going to our wonderful Magic Aroma in Pinelands, and we walked in, and the wine sommelier said, "Hello, Dr. Bowman, CWM." And I said, "Oh, what is CWM?" And he says, "Cape Wine Master." And I said, No, I'm not a Cape Wine Master." And he said, "Well, you should be, because you always bring such wonderful wines here, and you always have a story with the wine. You should do it." And when we sat down at the table, Johnny said to me, "You're so bored. Why don't you just start doing something in wine?" And that's when I started with the Cape Wine Academy and went the whole hog to the Cape Wine Master level, which incidentally, of course, Norma Ratcliffe's daughter, Jenny, where she's visiting at the moment, is also a Cape Wine Master in Canada.
That you found your way into wine has been great for all of us, because you're a great champion of it. You have this particular interest in a rather stronger form of wine, the Brandy. Where did that come from? Where's that love of brandy? Well,
as I said to you earlier, I always tasted my dad's brandy. And then, because the Brandy Foundation used to, in the very beginning of the Cape Wine Academy and Cape Wine Masters studies, was included and part of the sponsorship, there was a brandy exam and a brandy theory exam. And of course, it includes all manner of brandy, such as cognac and Armagnac, and even brandies from Portugal, Spain, and Italy. And once I got involved in that, I really actually loved it, and then started traveling to places where there was a lot of brandy. And it was very interesting to see, for me in any event, that South African brandies are probably some of the best in the world. And when I'm judging in competitions, everybody wants to be on the panel the day that South African brandy is being judged, because they know from reputation how good it is. So South Africa's won quite a lot of international prizes. So very happy with that. And I'm also very happy that there's now a new lease of brandy with some of the craft gin producers are also getting into brandy and putting their own stamp on it. And again, as Angela said, with the younger people getting involved, there's so much more innovation and so much fun things happening in the brandy industry. I mean, we've now in Cape Town got our own brandy bar, which doesn't exist anywhere else in South Africa. So very exciting things happening in the brandy industry.
I suspect said brandy bar has probably been built outside Winnie's front door to allow her to ensure it has regular custom. I want to touch a bit more on that in a moment, but let's head back to just south of Toronto. I think it's Oakville, Canada, to Norma. The Cape Winemakers Guild, Norma. How much of a big deal was it you becoming that first member? Did you appreciate the impact of it? And was what was that experience like, becoming part of what was until then very much a boys' club?
It was very important for me, but I didn't see it as the prestige. I was invited. It was a boys' club, still is. And they invited me in those days to join, but they came round and they all tasted my wines, and I had to go to a couple of tasting functions. And my view was that I was new in the industry. This would be a great learning experience for me, because these were quite specific technical tastings every month. And we put quite a lot of money in so that we, as the Winemakers Guild, could actually taste a lot of wines that nobody else got to taste. And we all brought them back when we went overseas. And then I was totally absorbed. But it was very small then. I think we were only about 10 or 11 people. And maybe 12, maybe 15, but not that. There must be about 50 now. When I go to the tastings now, I have to work out who all these young winemakers are that are making all these big, wonderful waves. And then I was nominated as the chairman, 1993. Now that was an honor. And I thought, okay, I've got to do my very best here. I'm quite good at admin. That means I'm very bossy. And I said, what we need for this auction of ours is we need a sponsor, but a serious sponsor. So I approached Cyprus. I said, let's get a Cape Bank. And they gave us 20,000 Rand in 1993 for our Cape Winemakers Guild auction, which actually was a lot of money. And that sort of launched our auction. And the auctions become very important, but the technical tastings are still important. Fortunately, as I'm a lifetime honorary member, a keeper of the key, they call it, I still get invited to all these wonderful tastings, which keeps me abreast of what's happening in the industry, not just with wines, but with the people in the industry, as I say, are making lots of waves, and they're all young people. And it's exciting for me. And I still part of a mentorship program with the Guild as well, which has been going for about 10 years. I still do quite a bit of mentoring on my own as well. And I like to help people.
It's a very different world today from the picture you paint to the one that you kicked off in. What, if you look back across the long stretch you've been involved in the industry, what's the most dramatic change or changes from when you first started to where the wine industry finds itself today in South Africa?
Oh, okay. I think the most dramatic change has been in viticulture. And I think if I was going to go and study a degree now, I would do viticulture. The changes in viticulture have transformed the wines. You know, winemaking is winemaking. It doesn't change that much. But the young guys that are doing viticulture, I think, are really making changes. And the Guild has changed their policy of only inviting winemakers into the Cape Winemakers Guild. They now also invite young viticulturists, which I think is fantastic. So of course, the other change about the Guild is that they've got they've got more women, not enough, but quite powerful women in the guild now who I think have embraced it with a lot of power. And I think, you know, there were just a few women in the wine industry when I started. And now, I mean, there must be 300 in Stellenbosch. They're women that's winemakers and assistant winemakers. And we also started a women's wine group, which is still going. Once again, COVID has messed up a lot of things, but it will get its power back when we can have more meetings. And yeah, I think viticulture and the number of women in the industry.
And we've seen the number of women in the industry just in this month alone. In fact, the number of people we didn't have on the show who we could have is quite staggering. So we expect many more as the rest of the year and more unfolds. Angela, similar question to you as the one I asked Norma, from when you started to where you find yourself today. What for you has been the biggest change in the wine world from your perspective and from the part of the wine world that you occupy?
I'd also agree with Norma about viticulture. I mean, in the old days, the first time the winemaker saw the grapes was when they arrived at the cellar. That's very different now. Much more attention is paid to the vines by the winemaker as well as the viticulturalist. But I'd add to that by also the spread of vines. Since the quota system was dropped in the early 90s, we've seen wine being grown in all sorts of new places, from Plettenberg Bay to Cape Winemakers, even for Riesberg on the edge of Lesotho. There is wines made there now. And Sutherland, some wonderful wines made in Sutherland. So it's definitely the spread and people being much more specific as to where they plant what. So site-specific wines are important, and this is making wine that much more interesting because they are much more individual, more distinctive. And I think this whole oak thing, I mean, Norma was talking about the new oak story, which was very big, and you've got to start a program somewhere. So if you haven't got any oak in your cellar, you've got to buy new oak. People wouldn't want to buy secondhand oak, not knowing how it had been treated before. And we got totally overwhelmed with too much oak, no fruit, too much oak. And that has all changed now. A lot of people are using old oak only and paying much more attention to how the wine is made so it can go into oak. So the wines are, as I say, they're fresher, lower alcohols coming in now too, but not too low. You're still getting the wonderful concentration and freshness and much more digestible wines than they used to be. I think that's the main thing. As far as writing goes, I think it's very difficult. You make no money from writing about wine. Never. I was very lucky when I entered the wine world and writing. There was very little competition, so I actually managed to save some money, much to my delight now. But nowadays, there's the internet. Anybody can write a blog. Anybody can read anybody else's work, and there are not very few paywalls, and very little pay is made for wine writing. I think it'll survive, but you've got to be clever to do it. You've got to know what you're writing about and be able to write. And here, of course, we've lost so many publications, so there's not the opportunities that there used to be. I think that's basically what I've found. And of course, there's much more interest in wine across the board in South Africa. It's not contained to just Cape Town and Joburg anymore. It's now much broader spread.
Well, I think, Angela, that's something that you are part of the credit for, is spreading the gospel of wine, as you have done so well for so long now, and spreading it beyond just South Africa. Josephine Prieur joining us from Saint-Emilion. Bonjour, Angela. Nice to see this wonderful women on your show today, Dan. And Angela helped to introduce me to the wine industry at the beginning in 1992. So there we go. Bonsoir, Josephine. Bienvenue, comme d'habitude. And lovely to have you on the show. Melissa Sutherland, referencing some of the comments there. Site-specific ties in with the trend in tourism about authenticity and sense of place being vital. And lovely to have so many of you watching the show. Wouter van der Merwe, but also legends love the stories. Well, let's get a couple more of the stories. Vivian, if I can come back to you, start with the low and then go to the high. What was the point with the Seven Sisters? We thought, you know what, this is not going to work. Why did I even try this? This is, I'm just banging my head against the wall. I'm going to go and cut flowers or go and open a restaurant, do something different. And then what was the moment for you when you thought, you know what, I think I might have made it. I think this might be the breakthrough.
Well, you're so right. There were times, very low times, that I thought, Vivian, you were really crazy. When my sisters told me, they actually laughed at me. They said to me, you're crazy. Why do you want to have a business in the wine industry? And well, I was so far down or far into the industry or the wine business that I could not really just walk away. But when I was very low is when 2 years into the industry, Lynn Sheriff came to me and she said to me, there's something wrong with your wines. And I was at the London Wine International Wine Fair, and I said, cannot be. I have got the most beautiful wines. Some of the wines actually won double gold Michelangelo. And she said to me, just hang on. She called some of the judges or wine masters, and they tasted my wines. And they said to me, some of the wines are oxidized, and obviously just because I did not know a lot about wine, that was my very first international wine exhibition. So I came back and I investigated some winemakers and masters of wines to see who I can approach to help me navigate my way through this oxidized wine. So I find at the time, I think it was Nerina Holt and Colin Frith and Mark Norrish, and we had blind tastings, and I was very anxious waiting for my feedback. And amongst a couple of companies, mostly black wineries or wine brands, my wines rated the lowest. And I thought, this is not for me. I cannot stay in this wine industry because I've been working with a family for 2 years, and this is what they did or gave to me. And that is where things changed for me. So I was ready to walk away. It was, in fact, my 9-year-old son that said to me, why do you want to walk away, and why did you want it to be in the wine business in the first place? So I had to really think hard. He's 25 now, and he's with me in the business. He works as hard as I am. And so I had to rethink, and that is when I entered the business course at the Stellenbosch University and a few Cape Wine Academy courses. And then my high point was when our wines have been served on American Airlines or have been selected to be served on American Airlines, first in business class in 2009. And it was quite a big order. And Now you must remember, I did not start my wine business with money. I started it with a term, payment term of about 3 months, and my first market was America. So we got into about 8 states, and then 23 states, and later on 42 states, and selling in all the local wine stores, grocery stores, and yes, so that was my high. I could actually give to each of my sisters some money and buy some good food and stock up the cupboards, because there were times that I did not even have a face cream or 100 rand to put in my car for petrol. And so I had quite a few lows in the industry, and I'm getting a few highs. We have just launched our wines in the little wine stores in Europe and Belgium, the Great Britain, and yeah, soon my wines will be in other countries as well. Yeah.
A tenacious wine shop, and Vivian, I suspect you mentioned some highs there. I think they're going to be a lot more highs to come, and the fact that you've had those challenges are going to make those high points all the better to savor. Before we go into taste the wine, let's jump back quickly to the good doctor. Winnie, we've spoken a little bit about the change in the wine landscape. What about your feelings on where South Africa was from your perspective, where it is today, and where South Africa can sit proudly or otherwise as a global wine player? As a global wine player.
I just listened to what Angela was saying about how things
improved viticulture-wise, as Norma said, but the fact that people are planting the right varieties in the right places, so that makes for better wines, because the quality of the wine immediately increases. And we see this with competitions where South African wines come out on top, and it's amazing that it's not always the usual suspects. It's sometimes one that you don't expect to be winning, but they've been working at their viticulture, they've been working at their what they are putting in the bottle, and of course the soul of the place and the soul of the winemaker and the philosophy of the producer. And that's what's so interesting, because there's nothing worse than tasting a bottle of wine that makes you just feel it's just another bottle of wine. You want to taste something that tells a story, and there are so many stories in our South African wine industry. Sadly, some of the tellers of these stories have passed on, and I really feel that we should write down all those early stories and learn from them. But people are trying new things. If we look particularly at say Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, they both really found their place in the Hemel and Ader Valley and in Elgin, so they do well there. And if we look at competition results, if that is something that one would like to go for, those areas do extremely well in those two categories. But those wines are sought all over the world. I mean, Greg Sherwood, who sells a lot of South African wine in the UK, he will tell you that people seek out those special wines, either recommended by him or found in competition results. And that is more and more the case for South Africa. It is now rather the expected result rather than a surprise or a sadness that we didn't win anything, because we are winning lots of competitions and we are out there. I mean, I often get a phone call in the evenings from friends in America or Australia, where they're sitting in a restaurant in one of those countries and say, wow, look what's on this menu, and we're definitely ordering the South African wine. So people are getting more and more used to ordering South African wine outside of South Africa, and that's a very, very good thing in my view.
It certainly is. You talk about stories in wine. We love stories in wine. Tell me a story about wine, if you will, Dr. Winnie. Tell me about some Albarino called Flower Girl that you very kindly sent up for me. This is your wine of choice. What is it? Who makes it? Why has this got the Dr. Bowman seal of approval?
This is my very special friend, Jenny Powell, who's a intrepid American who came to South Africa because she liked the waves. And she bought a farm called Protea Heights in Stellenbosch, which was already a Protea producer and exporter of our national flower. And she was a great surfer and still is today, and decided distances are not really a problem. And she bought a house in Kommetjie. So you can imagine traveling from Kommetjie to Stellenbosch every day to your wine farm. And with Jenny very hands-on, she plunged into the deep end, and in fact she was one of the first people to have her debut Chenin Blanc awarded with 5 stars when she first produced it in 2009. So everybody knows her more for her Chenin. I love the whole story of Jenny because she bought Protea Heights with the flowers, and she decided that she would have flower labels on her bottles, and she bought the license to reproduce some of the Mary Delaney, who was an American lady who painted flowers, and the whole collection is at Kew Gardens in London, and she got a license to reproduce that on her bottles. So you will see on all her bottles there are flower depictions, and they're beautiful. They're absolutely beautiful. The Alvarinho is something that I really love because it's a new grape, which is also, as we were talking about things changing in South Africa with global warming, we have to look elsewhere for grapes that will grow and thrive in South Africa. And Alvarinho, of course, is a Spanish grape, and it's done very well in South Africa. I think there are now about 2 or 3 producers who make it. And this particular one of Jenny's is on her farm, and it was grafted in 2018. So in other words, she changed the original vine to an Alvarinho vine, and the original vines were planted in 2009. So quite a nice age on it, and it's just lovely. It's a little bit cold in Cape Town for this wine tonight, but I still like it. It is just so lovely and fresh, and she makes it using also innovatively concrete eggs and stainless steel tanks. So you get that wonderful perfume of nectarines and peach and pear and apple, and on the palate it's just light and fruity and fresh and just gorgeous for summer. I was actually hoping it was going to be warmer tonight. Luckily I've got a couple of bottles for summer. When you come down, Dan, we can have some of this after the brandy, just to cleanse your palate a little bit. But for me, the lovely thing about this wine is that minerality, and it's got like a grapefruit pithiness at the end, which is just so lovely. And I love this wine, and I love the name Flower Girl, and I hope you enjoy it.
I first fell in love with South African Alvarinho through Team Newton Johnson and the version they make, which is just dry and steely and gorgeous. And this is added to my list of Alvarinhos. I should be drinking a lot more. Great pleasure. Winnie, thank you. I love it. I love the label as well. Melissa Sutherland, please share the name again. It is Flower Girl. So there we go. Botanica Wines are making their Flower Girl. So head off and find yourself some. Greg Sherwood, we sell that Alvarinho too. Lovely, almost certainly wine that Daryl Balfour owns, because he owns every wine ever made, ever. And Greg mentioning, just in response to Winnie's comments there, Winnie's absolutely right. There's a massive group of European connoisseurs who chase South Africa's top wine releases every year. High quality, characterful wines with personality and a story, definitely the way to go. Daryl Balfour saying, listening to Vivian's story is so inspiring. Wow. Well, it certainly is, Daryl. The wine's not bad either. Let's go and find out what we've got today. Vivian, you mentioned earlier that one of your first 2 grapes was the Chardonnay. That's exactly what you sent up to me. Tell me a little bit about this particular wine that I have in my glass very happily.
So Dan, the Seven Sisters wine range on easy drinking wines because we did not know wines. We didn't drink wine at the time. We just wanted a nice wine. So this is an easy drinking, not serious wine. It's for the newcomers in the industry. It's been on a bit of oak, not second fall. Sorry, I'm talking about the Brutus. There's a few staves in the stainless steel tank just to give it some structure. But other than that, it's coming from the Robertson Valley, and I liked the cleanliness of the soil structures of the Robertson Valley, and that's why I chose to bring my Chardonnay from that side.
Well, I think it was an inspired choice. Those staves give me just that little whisper of wood, but otherwise the fruit is telling a very uncomplicated and very welcoming story and making for a delightful wine. We're almost at the end of the show, so let's jump in very quickly to our penultimate wine, and we go over to Angela. You've gone for something a little exotic here, Angela. Here Be Dragons, and what I suspect might have been the outfit you were wearing when you arrived in 1970. What am I drinking? Who's making it?
Oh, Dan, I'd take this off the shelf just for the label and the name, but the wine is lovely. It's Semillon. I told you that I love Semillon, and I made Semillon. This is a new wine, a new producer, although she's very practiced in making wine. Her name's Jolette Stain. She's a Stellenbosch graduate many years ago. She did her master's thesis in Spain. And this is her first wine, one of two. She's made two Semillons from the same site on the Helderberg. This has received about 60% skin contact, which accounts for this darker color. But what I love about Semillon is that it's more about texture than it is about overt fruit. And I think that we don't pay enough attention to texture. And Semillon has got it because it's quite a low acid grape. So to give it this bit of skin contact gives it freshness from the tannins, but also allows that wonderful texture of Semillon as it ages, which it needs to do to really reach its heights. And this is, to me, is just lovely. It's still very young, and mine's a little bit cold, as we've all been, Winnie and I have mentioned, it's really freezing and wet down here again. So not very nice. But I think that Jolette has also worked at many wineries, top wineries in the Cape, Graham Beck, Fable, and ended up at Steenberg, where she made Semillon. So she was inspired to take up the cuddles for an underdog. And Here Be Dragons sort of marks uncharted territory. You know, on the old maps, when they couldn't go any further, they said, Here be dragons. So that's the reason behind this. And I think it's a lovely, lovely wine, beautiful packaging, and I'm sure that it will age beautifully.
I've no doubt it will. I also think it's a wine that for now sits in that kind of niche space, but this Semillon story is unfolding more and more with every passing South African vintage, and you only have to drink it to realize why that's the case. Lovely example, and thank you for pointing me in the direction thereof, Angela. Now let's go with our last wine, and this is the grand crescendo as we head back to Canada's single greatest export, who's gone home briefly, but she's now very much South African. Let's go back to 2009. We talked about the Cabernet Franc earlier and your role in giving it a foothold in South Africa. We've got some 2009. I love Cabernet Franc. You've made so much amazing wine over the years. Norma, why choose this one?
I chose this one because I love Cabernet Franc, and I was instrumental in, I think, making it popular as a variety. Angela also came to my cellar in the 80s, and I had a tank of Cabernet Franc, and she said, Norm, this is delicious. You must do something with it. So 88, which is 33 years ago, we bottled Cabernet Franc and have never looked back. a few people had bottled Cabernet Franc before, but they weren't very good ones. Anyway, so this was a sensational vintage. It's got that rich, dark, berry fruit. By 2009, I'd also learned, as Angela mentioned, that a lot of wood is not the secret to producing these great wines. And I think it's one of the best vintages that I ever made in my career. At the time, it was the best of the decade, but this wine at 2009, I think it's still got 5 or 6 or more years to go. It's dark and rich. The color is still dense. And once again, as Angela says, mouthfeel. The texture of this wine in your mouth, it just coats your mouth and slides down your throat. So Cabernet Franc is one of my best and favorite varieties, and here you go.
I sit in a very similar school. I adore Cabernet Franc, and I think I'm going to get onto the phone to Tom Orpin straight after this and see if he's got any of it left in the cellar, because it is delightful and we'll still get more so, as you say, over the next little while. Normally we stick to an hour. I'm going to extend by just a moment or two, because in closing, Norma, I'd like to ask you one final question. From all your years making wine, part of the guild, seeing the industry develop, with you being a huge part of that development, how upbeat, confident, positive is Norma Ratcliffe about the South African wine industry? And if there was one thing you'd love to see us doing to take where we are up to another level and make the most of the extraordinary resources, both human and natural, that we have in South Africa, what would that be?
Okay, the most exciting thing that is going to give the South African industry a future are the young people that are in it now, who've got their heads right. They're making the innovative wines. And the only thing that I feel, and it's always something I loved about the Guild, is that South Africa's got to work together a little bit more to promote these wines overseas. It's really hard right now with COVID and lockdowns and everything else. But the South African industry has a great future. And I think they're not the guy that makes 5,000 cases, but the guy that makes 30,000 cases of high quality wine is going to put the wines on the map overseas.
And that, I think, is an upbeat note on which to finish. And we've got just a final comment there from Josephine Prieur. Hello, Norma. My first Cabernet Franc that I really loved and appreciated was my first Cabernet Franc at Warwick. Thank you for your experience. And I cannot finish off a month of Women in Wine without bringing in one of my all-time favorite women. It'd be my mum, who's watched this show. She does all of them. Wonderful stories to end this month of Women Winemakers. Thanks to them all. Well, I can only echo that, because today's been absolutely brilliant. I love doing this show because I learn so much, and it really is a chance to sit back, drink amazing wine, and hear terrific stories. And that is exactly what we have done today. So to Norma, all the way from Canada, thank you for getting up and opening some wine earlier on in the day, and brilliant wine at that. Vivian, with your story and the challenges of overcoming to get to where you are today. And Winnie and Angela, we've been to many, many wine events together, many more to come. To all four of you, thank you so much for wrapping up the month in the perfect way, giving me great wine and giving us such a lovely evening. So to all four of you, thank you, and cheers to four great women in South African wine.
Cheers. Thank you, Dan. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, girls.
Thank you.
So there we go. What an absolutely fabulous, fabulous collection. Vivian Kleynhans and her Seven Sisters story and the triumph that brand has become. Angela Lloyd, half a century and more of writing about tasting and celebrating South African wine. Winnie Bowman, who has Brandy for breakfast and kicks on from there and does so much for our local industry. And Norma Ratcliffe, who is as iconic as wine icons come in South Africa. It ends a splendid month. I've really enjoyed this. We'll obviously have loads more women on the show all of the time, but this particular month I think has been great to celebrate, great to pay tribute, and great to just drink fabulous wine and share lovely stories. So thank you, not just to our four guests this evening, but to everybody who has been on the show over the course of this last month. A new month starts by the time we're on the next show. That'll be Thursday. And ahead of Thursday is Wednesday, surprisingly. And Wednesday is Cup Classique Day, which means wherever you are in the world, have Cup Classique on hand, open some bubbles, and it is 50 years of celebrating Cup Classique in South Africa. Remember, it started 1971 with Frans Malan. Well, we'll have Johan Malan on the show on Thursday, together with Peter Ferreira, Mr. Bubbles himself, and Jeff Greer, who also played such a huge role in the development of Cup Classique in South Africa. And all three of them will be pouring some glasses, telling some stories, and looking back on 50 years of South African Cup Classique. That's coming up on Thursday for this evening. Thanks again to Vivian, to Norma, to Winnie, and to Angela, and to all of you for watching right around the world. Your support is always greatly appreciated. Keep drinking South African wine, keep supporting it. I'll see you back on Thursday. Cheers. Thank you. Bye. To join the Pick and Pay Wine Club, simply SMS your smart shopper number to 36775. It's absolutely free, and you'll get for yourself 3 times the smart shopper points on every bottle of wine bought. You'll also get a 20% discount on 10 different wines each month, a 25% discount on a case of wine, and a Magnum, some terrific competitions and invitations to awesome events.